One of the most fearsome and infamous conquerors in history was Genghis Khan, the Mongolian warrior ruler who seized a huge amount of land throughout his time in power. He was the first Khan of the Mongol Empire, and he ruled from 1206 until his death in 1227. But the Mongol Empire became one of the largest empires in history, following his campaigns in Asia. Genghis Khan was a man who was generous to his followers. However, he was a man who was incredibly ruthless, and his forces were responsible for the slaughter and executions of millions of people. His conquests were notorious, and in some lands he is considered a brutal tyrant, but he had a very disciplined military who rampaged quickly throughout lands and seized control of them. But the death of Genghis Khan was rather strange, but there has been a rumour that emerged throughout the centuries that following the funeral of the leader and commander, that the people who attended his funeral were executed to protect the burial site's location, and still today, this is missing. Join us today as we look at the ruthless executions of Genghis Khan's funeral. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Temujin was born around 1162, close to the border of Mongolia and Siberia. His mother had been kidnapped by his father and then forced to marry, but there were many different nomadic tribes living on the Central Asian steppe, and they constantly fought and raided against each other, and it was a very dangerous time for the young Temujin to grow up. His father was poisoned by a rival group, and then Temujin's own clan left him to fend for himself, along with his mother and his siblings, because the group did not have to then feed them. Temujin even then slaughtered his half-brother, who was older, to take over the household, but he was then enslaved by his former clan, but he did escape. He married in 1178 and had 4 sons and some daughters too, but his wife Borta was then kidnapped, but he then made a number of alliances and carved a fearsome reputation for himself as a brutal warrior. People heard about this young warrior, they then wanted to join and follow him, but Temujin went against the traditions of the time. He promoted skilled allies rather than his family members, but also when he captured enemy leaders, rather than ransoming them, he simply executed the leaders and then absorbed other members of the enemy groups into his own group, making them larger. But Temujin had a number of strict rules as to what he expected his forces to do. He made them loot after battle, was one, to ensure his soldiers' minds were not on greed or wealth, but instead fighting the enemy, and he was skilled with how he arranged his soldiers. His followers were from different religions, but by 1205 he had defeated the majority of his local rivals. He then called a huge meeting of representatives to establish a nation under his leadership, and during this he was proclaimed Chinggis Khan, or the universal ruler, and he became known as Genghis Khan to those in the West and in Europe. So at this time he was a leader of the steppe tribes, and he was overseeing lands in which over 1 million people were living. He banned the sale and kidnapping of women, and also banned slavery of any Mongol, and he then ruled that anyone caught stealing livestock would be put to death. He made a number of other developments as he carried out regular censuses of his lands, and he also allowed foreign ambassadors to visit, and he allowed people to worship whatever religions they wanted in his land, as long as they stayed within his rules. But the time then came for Khan to lead his forces to create an empire. The first campaign outside of Mongolia occurred in northwestern China, and the Mongols then attacked the Xizia capital. The skill of the army was in the fact they travelled without a supply train. It was mostly cavalry men who would ride quick and were skilled with bows and arrows, and the speed of their attack and slaughter then allowed them to rest before they started all over again and took more land quickly. The Xizia ruler submitted and even paid Genghis Khan tribute, but the Mongols then rampaged further into China, attacking the Jin dynasty in the north. The Mongols were outnumbered, but they attacked the countryside and many fled for their lives. But the Jin army turned against its own, and they slaughtered thousands of their own people due to food shortages. But in 1214, Khan then besieged modern-day Beijing, and the city was then sacked by Khan's forces after the Jin ruler went back on his words. In 1219, Khan went further, attacking modern-day Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Iran and Uzbekistan. A treaty was agreed with the Sultan of the Khwarezm Empire, and he then killed some of Khan's ambassadors. But the Mongols smashed through different cities, and he did allow some people to live, those who would be of use to him, such as skilled workers. But some people were used as human shields during the next attacks on the next settlements. But the propaganda value of the Mongols was huge, and Genghis Khan became incredibly feared all across Europe and Asia. He went back to Mongolia in 1225, and he was in control of a huge amount of land from the Caspian Sea to the Sea of Japan. But he continued to attack and strengthen his forces. However, during winter of 1226, Genghis Khan was thrown from his horse whilst he was out hunting, and he became very sick following this. This slowed his army down, and his commanders and sons pushed for him to return to Mongolia to recover and get better, before launching another attack upon Chinese lands once he had recovered. But Genghis Khan refused to do this, but on the 25th of August 1227, he died. His death was kept very, very secret, and cities still fell to the Mongols after his death, and one city was brutally sacked, being put to the sword, and many civilians were slaughtered brutally. It's not known specifically what killed Genghis Khan, and many historians have debated that he may have had bubonic plague or suffered from typhus or malaria. The explorer Marco Polo even claimed he was shot by an arrow during a siege, and another writer said how he was struck by lightning. But following his death, he was taken back to Mongolia, and he was prepared for burial. But one issue around the burial of Genghis Khan and what came next was the evidence surrounding the burial. The details about the funeral procession and subsequent burial were not made public, and he was believed to have been buried on or near to the sacred Burg Khan Khaldun Peak in the Khenti Mountains. This site was declared as a banned zone, and no one was allowed to enter except very high-profile guards. The grave was honoured with 3 days of offerings in 1229, and Khan may have been buried quickly, as the Mongols did not know how to preserve or embalm a body successfully. But one shocking legend or story that came out about his burial was the fact that officials in charge may have carried out a brutal and ruthless massacre to ensure that Khan's tomb and burial site remained a secret. In one account, it was said that 2,000 slaves who had worked on burying the deceased commander and emperor were slaughtered and executed by their guards. These men who had executed the slaves were then turned upon by a 2nd Infantry unit who then slaughtered the guards. It was said that these soldiers then rampaged throughout the countryside and went through many different settlements and regions near to the burial site, and that they then murdered everyone who saw them to make sure that no one knew the precise place where Genghis Khan had been buried. They tried to allegedly wipe out any trace of witnesses, and because of this a final group of infantry, it was said, then returned to their base and took their lives, so that no one alive had seen where the Mongol emperor was buried. This is, as mentioned, a legend, but it offers a crazy theory as to the lengths that the Mongols went to protect the gravesite of Khan. They did not want his remains desecrated or dug up, and following his death, he became a godlike deity. Another Mongolian legend also claims that the Anon River was even diverted to flow near to the gravesite of Khan. But still today his remains are not found, and this could have been due to the massacre if this did take place. The massacre of people at the funeral of Genghis Khan has been debated by historians, and many accept that this is just a legend that has been told to add to the notorious reputation of the conqueror. However, still today the burial site has not been specifically found. Genghis Khan was known for being a ruthless leader of the Mongol Empire, and he established a huge amount of territory for his empire and people in Asia by attacking at speed and with skill. He feared no one, and did bring in a number of progressive ideas to his empire, such as banning the kidnapping of women. But today his burial site is still lost, and whether you believe the legend about the funeral massacre is up to you. However, it would have been in keeping with the ruthless nature of the emperor. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.